I had always believed that Samantha and I had the kind of marriage other people envied, stable, supportive, and full of love. We had our routines, morning coffee together, evening chats about our days, and the occasional weekend getaway when life allowed it. After 10 years of marriage, I thought we had cracked the code to long-term happiness. That illusion shattered on a cold Wednesday night. I had left work late that day. A last-minute email from a client sent me back to the office after I had already made it halfway home. It was the kind of annoying disruption that had been happening more often recently. I joked with my team that I was married to my job almost as much as to Samantha. Looking back, I wonder if that's what gave her the opening she needed. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I pulled into our driveway. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the living room. Samantha wasn't expecting me back so early. I had told her I might stay at the office overnight to prepare for a presentation, but I had forgotten an important flash drive at home, and my plans had changed. I stepped inside quietly, not wanting to wake her if she'd already gone to bed. As I walked through the hallway, I froze. A low voice was coming from the living room. At first, I thought she was on a work call. She often stayed up late handling tasks for her event planning business. But then I caught snippets of the conversation, and my stomach turned. "I told you not to call me on this number," Samantha hissed. Her voice was a mixture of frustration and panic. A muffled male voice responded. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, deep and coaxing. My hand tightened around the strap of my briefcase as I edged closer, pressing my back against the wall just outside the living room. I wasn't sure why I didn't walk in and confront her right then. Maybe it was denial. Maybe I needed to hear more to believe what I already suspected. "Ethan has no idea," she said, her tone softening. "He's clueless. But you have to be patient. This isn't easy for me either." The voice on the other end said something again, and Samantha let out a soft laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from her in months, a sound that once had been just for me. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," she whispered. "You know how much I've missed you." My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and slipped into the shadows of the hallway. The betrayal was like a physical blow, a knife twisting in my gut. Samantha ended the call a minute later and walked into the kitchen. I heard her pour herself a glass of wine, humming softly. That casual ease, the way she moved as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just ripped the foundation of our marriage apart, made my blood boil. I stayed hidden, breathing deeply to calm the rage that threatened to explode out of me. Storming in and screaming at her would feel satisfying for a moment, but it wouldn't accomplish anything. If she had been lying to me for God knows how long, she could lie her way out of this too. No, I needed proof. I needed a plan. Quietly, I retreated to the bedroom, my mind racing. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo of us on the nightstand. It was from a trip to Italy last year, her idea, an anniversary surprise. We looked so happy in that picture, standing in front of the Colosseum with the sunset behind us. Now, it felt like a cruel joke. Then I saw it. A hotel keycard tucked partially under her phone on the nightstand. My chest tightened as I reached for it, flipping it over to reveal the name of a boutique hotel downtown. I hadn't even known she was going out tomorrow. "Patience," I muttered under my breath, repeating her word. Tomorrow, I would find out everything. As I slipped the keycard back into place, I knew there was no turning back. Samantha wasn't just going to betray me. She was going to regret it. For now, I lay down beside her when she finally came to bed, feigning sleep. Her scent, once comforting, now felt like poison, and I knew I would never look at her the same way again. The next morning, Samantha was chipper, humming as she moved through the kitchen making breakfast. Her energy was almost maddening, as if she hadn't just whispered sweet nothings to another man hours ago. I watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, forcing a neutral expression as she fried eggs and buttered toast. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said with a smile that used to light up my day. Now, it felt like a mask. "Want me to make you a plate?" "No, thanks," I replied, my voice steady. "Just coffee. Got a busy day ahead." "So do I," she chirped, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "Meetings, errands, you know how it is." She was good. Too good. The casual tone, the lack of hesitation. It was the kind of performance that could fool anyone. But not me. Not anymore. Anything exciting planned? I asked, keeping my tone light. Her hand paused mid-reach for the salt shaker. Oh, nothing out of the ordinary. Just work stuff. Might grab lunch with Jenny. Jenny, her go-to alibi. I didn't let my expression falter. Sounds nice. Samantha smiled and went back to her eggs, completely unaware that I was already 10 steps ahead of her. After she left the house, I got to work. I had spent the sleepless hours of the previous night planning my next moves, and now it was time to execute. My first stop was the office, where I grabbed a surveillance kit I kept for security consultations. Tiny, discrete cameras and GPS trackers that would help me monitor Samantha's every move. At home, I installed the first camera in her car. I knew she wouldn't notice. She barely glanced at the dashboard, let alone under the seat. Next, I attached a GPS tracker to the undercarriage. This would let me follow her movements throughout the day. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. By mid-morning, I was at my desk, monitoring her location from my laptop. Samantha's car stayed parked at her office for hours, which gave me time to dig deeper into the other piece of this puzzle, Greg. A quick search of the boutique hotel whose keycard I had found revealed that it catered to the upper crust of the city, business elites, celebrities, and politicians. It was discreet, luxurious, and the perfect place for an affair. Greg, whoever he was, clearly had money to burn. Using a few connections, I traced his phone number from Samantha's call logs. His name, Greg Saunders, popped up quickly in the results. A high-level executive at a local tech firm, married to a woman named Lauren. They had 2 kids, a sprawling estate in the suburbs, and a picture-perfect life. Or so it seemed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Greg and Samantha's affair was more than a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of his wife and family, too. That gave me an idea. Later that afternoon, Samantha's GPS signal pinged from the shopping district downtown. I logged into the camera feed and saw her sitting in her car, laughing as she talked on her phone. Judging by the expression on her face, I didn't need to guess who she was talking to. Keep laughing, I muttered. You'll regret it soon enough. When she returned home that evening, I was already there, sitting in the living room with my laptop open. You're back early, she said, surprised. Yeah, wrapped up work faster than I thought, I said with a shrug. How was your day? Oh, the usual. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, but I turned slightly, pretending to adjust my laptop. It was a small gesture, but it rattled her. I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes before she recovered. I'm going to take a shower, she said quickly and disappeared down the hall. Once the water started running, I checked the tracker again. Her plans for tomorrow were clear. She would drive straight to the hotel. I opened a new tab on my laptop and began compiling the evidence, screenshots of text messages, surveillance footage from the car, even a recording of her phone call earlier that day. It was a painful process, but necessary. I needed to ensure there were no loose ends. By the time she came back into the room, dressed in pajamas and smelling like lavender, I had closed the laptop and tucked it away. Dinner? She asked, as if nothing had changed. Sure, I said, my voice calm. But everything had changed. Samantha didn't know it yet, but her lies were unraveling, and I was the one pulling the thread. Tomorrow, I would follow her to that hotel, and this time, I wouldn't just be a silent observer. I would end this on my terms. The morning air felt heavier than usual as Samantha left the house. She kissed me on the cheek, a routine gesture, but this time it felt rehearsed, almost mechanical. I played my role perfectly, feigning a warm smile and a casual wave as she backed her car out of the driveway. I watched her taillights disappear down the street before grabbing my keys and heading to the surveillance van I had rented under an alias the day before. Parked discreetly a block away, it was equipped with everything I needed. A live GPS tracker feed, audio monitors, and a camera setup. Her car pinged on my laptop as she took the highway downtown. True to my suspicions, her destination was the boutique hotel. I started the van and followed at a safe distance, staying just far enough behind to avoid detection. When she pulled into the hotel parking lot, I found a spot with a clear view of the entrance. My camera zoomed in as Samantha stepped out of her car, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. Black, tight-fitting, and far too glamorous for an alleged lunch with Jenny. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked toward the entrance. She looked around briefly, her movements tense, before disappearing inside. I clenched the steering wheel, the sting of betrayal sharp in my chest. This was no misunderstanding, no misread signals. This was premeditated, deliberate. I waited, my pulse racing as I watched the lobby entrance through the camera feed. A few minutes later, a man appeared, Greg. I recognized him from the social media search I had done the night before. Tall, polished, and exuding arrogance, he greeted Samantha with a brief hug that lingered just a second too long. The lobby's glass doors swung shut behind them, and I watched the elevator indicator tick upward to the 7th floor. They were heading to room 718. This was it. I couldn't just sit back anymore. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the envelope I had prepared the night before. A thick packet of evidence, including screenshots of text messages, audio recordings, and photos. It wasn't for Samantha or Greg. It was for Greg's wife, Lauren. 45 minutes later, I was standing outside a suburban mansion that practically screamed wealth. The doorbell chimed softly, and I heard footsteps approaching. Lauren opened the door, her expression polite but puzzled as she looked me up and down. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "My name is Ethan, and I think we need to talk." Her brow furrowed, but she stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. I handed her the envelope without a word and waited as she opened it. At first, her expression was blank, as if her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Then her lips parted slightly, her face paling as she flipped through the photos and read the transcripts of the text messages. This can't be real," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm afraid it is," I said softly. "Your husband and my wife. They're together right now at the Crescent Hotel. Room 718. Lauren stared at me, her eyes shimmering with tears, but there was steel behind her gaze. "How long have you known?" "A few days," I admitted. "I wanted to be sure before I came to you." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you for telling me." I had my suspicions, but seeing it like this, her voice trailed off as she clutched the envelope to her chest. "What do you want to do?" I asked, giving her the reins. Lauren straightened, her composure returning. "We're going there. Now." Back at the hotel, I parked a safe distance away as Lauren and I walked through the lobby. She carried herself with a quiet fury that was both impressive and terrifying. I trailed a few steps behind, letting her take the lead. The elevator ride to the 7th floor was suffocatingly silent. When the doors opened, Lauren strode down the hallway with purpose, stopping in front of room 718. She knocked sharply. The door opened after a moment, and there he was, Greg, his shirt untucked, his face paling as he recognized Lauren. "Lauren," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" she snapped, her voice like a whip. "I could ask you the same thing, Greg. Or maybe your new girlfriend wants to explain." Samantha appeared behind him, her face drained of color. "Ethan," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper as her eyes locked on me. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was electric, a raw, crackling storm in the narrow hallway. Finally, I stepped forward, my voice calm but icy. "Don't stop on my account. I just thought it was time everyone knew the truth." Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The devastation in her eyes was almost satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. "This is just the beginning," I said, turning on my heel. "Enjoy what's left of your little fantasy." And with that, I walked away, the echoes of Lauren's fury following me down the hall. I left the hotel with a sense of cold satisfaction, but knew I wasn't done. Exposing Samantha and Greg wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to live under the crushing realization that their betrayal had consequences they couldn't escape. By the time I got home, Samantha was already there. She must have rushed back after the confrontation at the hotel. I walked into the house to find her pacing the living room, her phone clutched in her hand. She froze when she saw me. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "I can explain." I held up a hand to cut her off. "Don't." Her lips quivered, and she stepped closer, reaching out to me. "It's not what you think." Please, just let me explain. It's exactly what I think, I said coldly, and I don't want to hear it. You've already said enough. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was a performance, I realized, a desperate attempt to manipulate me into absolving her. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. I didn't want this to happen, she sobbed. I was confused and Greg, Stop, I said sharply. My tone made her flinch. Do you think I care about your excuses? About Greg? This isn't just about what you did. It's about what you destroyed. And you're not crawling out of this unscathed. I turned and headed upstairs, leaving her standing there. My silence, I knew, would haunt her more than anything I could say. Over the next few days, I kept the pressure on without confronting her directly. I acted normal, too normal. I still ate meals with her, still said goodnight before bed. But there was no warmth in my words, no affection in my touch. The house became an icy battlefield where every moment of calm only heightened her anxiety. She started to unravel. I caught her staring at me during dinner, as if trying to decipher what I was thinking. When I left for work, she hovered by the door, watching me like she expected me to lash out or leave for good. Have a good day, she said one morning, her voice tentative. You too, I replied without looking at her. That was all it took to leave her visibly shaken. While Samantha was floundering at home, I focused on Greg. The information I had gathered on him wasn't just incriminating. It was career-ending. Greg wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a thief. The financial records I had pulled showed clear evidence of embezzlement from his company, all cleverly hidden under layers of falsified accounts. Lauren and I worked together to build a rock-solid case. She provided additional details, records of unexplained transactions, emails that hinted at his illicit activities. We compiled everything into a neat package and sent it anonymously to Greg's employer. The fallout was swift. 2 days later, Greg was escorted out of his office by security, his face plastered across local news outlets alongside headlines about fraud and theft. Samantha watched the news in stunned silence that evening, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. That's Greg, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I glanced at the screen, feigning mild interest. Looks like he's in trouble. She turned to me, her face pale. Ethan, did you? I told you not to talk to me about him, I interrupted, my tone icy. Samantha didn't press further, but the suspicion in her eyes told me she knew. The cracks in her facade deepened. She started staying up late, her phone clutched in her hand, but she didn't dare call or text Greg. She knew it would only add fuel to the fire. One night, I found her sitting in the darkened living room, staring blankly at the floor. Ethan, she said quietly as I passed by. I stopped but didn't turn to face her. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've lost everything, haven't I? I didn't respond. My silence was her answer. The final piece of my plan came into play when I sent an anonymous tip to Samantha's largest client. The tip included just enough evidence to suggest she had been using her professional network to cover for personal indiscretions, meetings that coincided with her secret rendezvous. It was enough to make her client reevaluate their relationship with her. She lost the contract a week later. When she confronted me about it, I simply shrugged. Actions have consequences, Samantha. You should know that by now. Her tears, her pleas, her desperate attempts to salvage what was left of her life fell on deaf ears. I wasn't the man she had betrayed anymore. I was the man who would ensure she felt every ounce of the pain she had inflicted. And this was only the beginning. The day of reckoning arrived like the crescendo of a symphony I had meticulously composed. Samantha's life, carefully curated to appear flawless, was on the verge of collapse. I just had to deliver the final note. The opportunity presented itself during a gala organized by the very company Samantha used to manage events for, before her largest clients severed ties. She hadn't been involved in this event, but she was attending, likely hoping to salvage what little reputation she had left. Greg's name was on the guest list too. Of course, I knew he wouldn't miss an opportunity to flaunt himself, even as his career imploded around him. Rumor had it, Greg's lawyers were already working overtime to keep him out of jail. Lauren and I decided this would be the stage where everything unraveled. I arrived early, blending into the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. My demeanor was calm, my face composed, but beneath the surface, I was a coiled spring. I positioned myself near the bar, keeping an eye on the entrance. Samantha appeared first, wearing a red dress I didn't recognize. She was striking, as always, but her posture betrayed her. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes darting around the room. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to survive. Greg followed not long after, entering with the swagger of a man who hadn't yet accepted his downfall. His wife, Lauren, walked in shortly behind him, her face a mask of composure. She had insisted on coming separately, knowing Greg wouldn't expect her presence. As the evening unfolded, Samantha and Greg eventually gravitated toward each other, their movements subtle but clear to anyone paying attention. They spoke in hushed tones near the back of the ballroom, their heads leaning close together. Lauren approached me at the bar, her lips curling into a small, determined smile. "Shall we?" "Let's," I replied, picking up the folder I had prepared. We crossed the ballroom together, weaving through the crowd. Conversations hushed as we neared Samantha and Greg, the atmosphere shifting as guests turned their attention toward us. "Greg," Lauren said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Greg's head whipped around, his expression shifting from confusion to dread. Samantha stepped back instinctively, her face paling as she spotted me beside Lauren. "What's going on?" Greg stammered, his bravado cracking. Lauren held up the folder and dropped it onto the table in front of them. The sound echoed in the otherwise silent room. "This," she said coldly, "is what's going on." The folder spilled open, revealing photos, transcripts of their messages, and financial records. Gasps rippled through the crowd as curious onlookers craned their necks to get a better look. "This is ridiculous," Greg sputtered, reaching for the papers. Lauren slapped his hand away. "Don't. You've done enough." Samantha stood frozen, her eyes darting between me, Greg, and the damning evidence. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "Save it," I said, my voice low but firm. "You've already lied enough for a lifetime. What is this about?" A man in the crowd asked, clearly unable to resist the unfolding drama. I turned to address the gathering. "This is about betrayal. Not just to me or Lauren, but to everyone who trusted these two. Greg, who embezzled millions from his company while carrying on an affair. Samantha, who played accomplice while pretending to be the perfect wife." The room buzzed with murmurs, the weight of their actions sinking in. Greg's carefully crafted mask shattered. He grabbed Samantha's arm, his voice low and angry. "This is your fault. You said no one would find out." "My fault?" Samantha snapped, her composure finally breaking. "You're the one who—" "Enough," Lauren cut in, her voice carrying over their squabbling. She stepped closer to Greg, her eyes blazing. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And as for you," she turned to Samantha, her gaze icy. "I hope you're proud of yourself." The crowd parted as Lauren stormed away, leaving Samantha and Greg standing in the middle of the ballroom, utterly exposed. I stayed just long enough to see Samantha leave the room in tears, Greg trailing behind her like a man chasing the remnants of a life he destroyed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Outside the venue, I found Lauren leaning against her car, her shoulders shaking slightly as she exhaled a deep, steadying breath. "Thank you," she said quietly when she noticed me. "For what?" "For helping me see the truth," she replied. "For not letting them get away with it." I nodded, unsure of what to say. As she drove away, I stood alone in the cool night air, the sounds of the city muffled by my own thoughts. The game wasn't entirely over yet, but the pieces were falling exactly where I wanted them. I didn't go home that night. The house I had once built with Samantha felt foreign, tainted by her betrayal. Instead, I stayed at a hotel across town, giving myself the time and space to prepare for what I knew would be the final confrontation. By morning, my phone was flooded with messages from Samantha. "Ethan, please come home. We need to talk. I don't know how this got so out of hand. I'm sorry. Please answer me. I love you. Please don't give up on us." The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. When I finally returned home that afternoon, Samantha was waiting in the kitchen, her face blotchy and pale from crying. She looked like a stranger to me now, her mask of confidence replaced with raw desperation. "Ethan," she began, her voice shaky. "We need to talk." I set my keys on the counter and leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed. "Talk then." Her words came tumbling out in a rush. "I messed up. I know I did. But I wasn't thinking clearly. Greg, he was a mistake. He doesn't mean anything to me. I was confused, and I let things go too far. But it was never about you. I still love you. I just—" "Stop." My voice was firm, cutting through her excuses. She froze, her lips trembling as she looked at me. Greg was a mistake? Confused? I let out a bitter laugh. You weren't confused when you met him at the hotel. You weren't confused when you were whispering on the phone late at night. And you weren't confused when you built an entire web of lies to cover your tracks. Don't insult me by pretending this was some lapse in judgment. Samantha's eyes brimmed with tears, but I wasn't moved. "Do you even know what you've done?" I continued, my voice rising. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything we built together. You tore apart a marriage, shattered trust, and for what? A man who's now facing criminal charges? Was it worth it?" She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I hate myself for what I did. Ethan, please, we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything you want. Fix this." I repeated, my tone icy. "You can't fix what's broken beyond repair." Samantha collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity. But then I remembered the hotel room, the lies, the betrayal, and any lingering sympathy evaporated. "I'm filing for divorce," I said flatly. Her head snapped up, her expression shifting from despair to shock. "No," she whispered. "Ethan, no. You can't mean that." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the table in front of her. "These are the papers. They're already drawn up. You can either sign them now or wait until they're served officially. Either way, we're done." Samantha stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "But you can't just throw away everything we've been through. You love me, Ethan. I know you do. We can move past this." I shook my head. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about love anymore. It's about trust. And you killed that the moment you chose him over me." As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm, her grip weak but desperate. "Please don't go. Please don't do this. I need you." I pulled my arm free, looking her square in the eye. "You needed me before you ever needed Greg. You made your choice, Samantha. Now live with it." I left her sitting there, broken and sobbing, but I wasn't done. I drove to Lauren's house that evening, knowing she had just as much reason to celebrate the end of this nightmare as I did. When she opened the door, she gave me a tired but satisfied smile. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Exactly how I planned," I replied. She handed me a glass of wine and raised her own. "To freedom, to freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. There was a strange sense of peace in knowing that the worst was over. Samantha and Greg thought they could take what they wanted without consequences. They thought their secrets would stay buried. But now, their worlds were crumbling, and I was finally free. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. The house felt different now, emptier, quieter. Samantha had left 2 days after our confrontation. She didn't have much of a choice. I made it clear that if she stayed past the weekend, I'd involve lawyers and the police. Her belongings were packed in a few suitcases, and when she walked out the door, she didn't even try to look back. It should have hurt to see her leave. But as the door clicked shut behind her, all I felt was relief. That week, I focused on rebuilding. The divorce was already in motion, and I had taken steps to cut her out of my finances and my life. It wasn't just about legal matters. It was about erasing the part of her that had wormed its way into every corner of my world. The satisfaction I felt watching her unravel was tempered by a deeper realization. She wasn't the same woman I had married. Maybe she never had been. The fallout hit Greg just as hard, if not harder. News of his financial crimes had spread beyond the company, and an official investigation had begun. He was arrested within a week. Lauren kept me updated, her messages often punctuated with sarcastic comments about Greg's attempts to spin the narrative. Apparently, he's blaming everyone but himself. One text read, "Sounds about right," I replied. Lauren and I became something like allies, connected by the shared destruction our spouses had wrought. One evening, she called to tell me Greg had agreed to her divorce terms without a fight. "Guess he doesn't have much leverage anymore," she said, her voice light. "Serves him right," I said. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. A month later, I stood in front of a lawyer's office, signing the last of the paperwork. The divorce was finalized. It was surreal, like closing the book on a chapter of my life that had once felt permanent. I celebrated that evening with Lauren. We met at a quiet wine bar, away from the prying eyes of mutual acquaintances. The atmosphere was warm, the conversation easy. "To starting over," she said, raising her glass. "To second chances," I replied. The toast wasn't about us. It wasn't about jumping into something new before the dust had settled. It was about reclaiming our lives, piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work and hobbies. The house was mine again, and I took the opportunity to make it feel like home. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and replaced the old photos with new ones. Landscapes, cityscapes, and snapshots of the places I wanted to visit someday. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for someone else's expectations. The unexpected moment of closure came when I received a letter from Samantha. It was handwritten, the edges of the paper smudged where her tears had soaked through. "Ethan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I destroyed something beautiful, something I never truly appreciated until it was gone. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away. I hope you find happiness again. I hope you find someone who treats you the way you deserve. I'll live with this regret for the rest of my life. Samantha." I read the letter twice, then set it down. Her words were filled with remorse, but they came too late. The damage was done, and nothing could undo it. Still, for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a strange sense of peace. She was gone, and so was the weight of what she had done. That weekend, I went on a hike, a long, grueling trek up a mountain I'd always admired but never had the time to climb. As I stood at the summit, the wind whipping against my face, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the view, the vast expanse of trees and valleys stretching endlessly before me. It wasn't just a picture. It was a symbol of my future, unmapped, unbounded, and mine to conquer. As I looked out over the horizon, a small smile crept onto my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive.